So, I want to start off by saying welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. If you're a fanatic of everything entertainment, this is the channel for you, but in today's movie review, we'll be talking about 1999's Idle Hands. So let's get into it. So this film was released in 1999, which is the year I was born, and I've been wanting to watch more movies that came out the year that I was born because sometime within the next year or two, I've been wanting to do like a top 10, top 15, or top 20 films from the year that I was born, which I think would be a pretty cool idea because I've only seen a very select few. Things like Toy Story 2, Sleepy Hollow, Idle Hands, and a couple of others. Like, I want to make a list talking about the movies that came out the year I was born because I think it would be a pretty cool idea. But I want to get into my history with this movie really quickly because the way that I got to know about this movie was really weird to me. Because as a kid, like the movies that I knew were either the ones that were out in theaters or just, movies at Walmart. So like all I knew was just those movies. I never knew that you could advertise movies anywhere else other than those type of places. So growing up as a kid, almost 20 years ago when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I was really big into collecting comic books. I'm not so much into that anymore, but I used to be really big into comic books. I think the last comic book that I bought was like 3 or 4 years ago when a friend came down to Georgia and we hung out. Shout out to Justin Lomas over at JJ Lomas Entertainment. I bought a comic book over at, it's called My Mom's Basement, which I thought was pretty funny, but I bought a comic book there and I still haven't read it yet, so that goes to show how much I care about comic books now. I'm more of a movie guy. I'd prefer to watch a movie over reading a comic book or just reading in general. I used to read big time as well, but about comic books. I saw this movie advertised in a comic book. I'm not sure if I still have that comic book anywhere. I might have to go look because I have a very select few comic books in my room. Um, I think I have like 10 or 15, so I might have to skim through those and see if I do have it or not. Um, but either way, I saw this film advertised in a comic book, and the imagery really stuck with me. I saw the poster, the one with the looks like a skeleton with a big ass arm and a hand. And then I saw the imagery of Seth Green with that bottle in his head, and to me, that really stuck with me. Like, I thought this movie was going to be a straight up horror movie. That's what I thought this thing was going to be because that imagery just stuck with me and it creeped me out. And I really wanted to see this movie. Like, I always thought Idle Hands was a straight up horror movie. And then, like, within the last, I'm going to say, 5 to 7 years, I found out that this was more of a stoner comedy horror film. And I was like, okay, I'm coming into the right age where that's more of my thing, anyways. So I knew what to expect going into this, and so with the announcement of the remake coming out, written by Finn Wolfhard, I thought this was the perfect time to talk about this movie because oddly enough, I watched this movie twice within the last month, and then a few days later they announced that. So I was like, okay, perfect timing. I need to talk about this movie now. And it's such a shame that this movie was a box office failure. The budget was 25 million, but it only made 4.2 million. I think this movie should have made at least like 70 or 80 million because it's more of my thing, but we'll get into that in a minute. So with that being said, let's get into the things that I did like about this movie. The hand in here is the same performer that played Thing in the Addams Family films from the 1990s, which I thought was really cool. He brings two different performances in each film. In Addams Family, it's more playful, and here it's more sinister. So I like that you can count these as performances, even though it's a hand. They're both portrayed by Christopher Hart, so shout out to him on that one because it's called Idle Hands. You can't talk about Idle Hands without talking about the hand. But even though I said that there's two different performances in each of these films, there is a bit of similarity in here because the way he moves his hand like that, you're like, yeah, you know it's the guy. Also, the stacked cast in here, you have the likes of Devon Sawa, Seth Green, Eldon Henson, Vivica A. Fox, and the always fabulous Jessica Alba. Which I'm going to go on a little tangent really quickly. How is that woman in her early 40s and she still looks like the Jessica Alba from Fantastic Four? How? How is that even possible? Like, it doesn't seem like she's aged within the last 15, almost 20 years. And this movie just made me more of a fan of her as well. I don't know. I love her haircut and everything. I don't want to get too much into it because I know my wife's watching, but I discovered a new film crush. I don't know. Like, I've always thought Jessica Alba was pretty and gorgeous, but I don't know. After seeing this movie, I'm like, okay, I get the appeal. And then seeing her in 2024, I'm like, this woman hasn't aged. What's up with that? What is she on? Also, when talking about the cast, you can't not bring up the cameos in here. You have Dexter Holland and the rest of the Offspring, but you also have Tom DeLonge from Blink 182, which plays a fast food employee. I don't remember if he has a line of dialogue or not, but he is like very blink and you miss it. I did not mean for that to be a pun, but where are you? No, I'm so sorry. And the practical effects in here are great, whether it be the hand itself or Eldon Henson's practical head, his decapitated head. That looks great. I mean, it's not a one for one of Eldon Henson, but I think it looks great. It reminds me of Chucky for some reason. And speaking of Eldon Henson, he looks like a chunkier version of Cameron Monaghan. I don't know if I'm the only person that sees that, but if you see it, let me know. I'm going to put some pictures up on screen because he does look like a chunkier version of Cameron Monaghan. Oh, and speaking of the practical effects, like I said, his decapitated head, but also the bottle stuck in Seth Green's head. That looks great. And that's the imagery that stuck with me, my entire life when thinking about this film. So, like, the practical effects in here are phenomenal. And when talking about Idle Hands, you have to bring up the humor because this is a very heavy stoner comedy from the 90s. And for the most part, it's my type of humor. Like, this movie is very much up my alley. It's not particularly a great film, but the comedy in here makes up for it. For the most part, I'm gonna say like 70-80% of the comedy lands for me personally. But this is a late 90s film, and some things might not hold up, especially for today's audiences. There's things in here that might be classified as problematic. I don't know. I'm just a fan of most of it because it's the type of comedy that I grew up with. Stuff like Super Troopers and the stuff from the 80s and 90s. That's my type of humor. Like, comedies for me, for the most part, are dead because there hasn't been a great one in years. I don't want to be that guy, but there hasn't been a great comedy in years, so it's refreshing to go back to a horror comedy that's not afraid to do certain things and say certain things, but not everything holds up, so we'll get into that in a little bit later. So with that being said, let's move on to the things that I mixed on with this film. Jack Noseworthy as Randy. He's portrayed as a creep that's in his early 20s, like 21, 22, that still wants to get with high schoolers. That is problematic to say the least. I hate people like that, which you should anyways, but I'm just saying that, like, this dude's been out of high school for 3 or 4 years. There's no need to be hooking up and trying to hook up with high schoolers. That's fucked up. And I find it odd that, like, he says that, I'm pretty sure it's him that uses the F slur for a gay person, which I find it really weird because he's been in a same-sex relationship since 1990. So that's a little fact that I just found out today. Like, I thought this dude was a douchebag in real life for some reason, but and things like that. But I just find it weird that he's gay, I'm thinking, if he's been in the same sex relationship since 1990, which I'm sure you can be bisexual or pansexual, whatever, but it doesn't really say on his Wikipedia page other than he's been in the same sex relationship since 1990. So I find it weird that he's playing that type of character. He sort of reminds me of Neil Patrick Harris in How I Met Your Mother, where Neil Patrick Harris is gay, but he's a player in How I Met Your Mother, and that's how this dude comes off to me. But the reason why I'm putting him in the mix section is because he's a character you love to hate, sort of like Trent from Transformers and Trent from Friday the 13th. So, like, he plays that type of character. And the ending in here is something else I'm mixed on because on a first time watch, I found it really funny, but on a second time watch, I felt more like Seth Green's character because it feels very anticlimactic. And yes, they make a joke about it, so that sort of like comforts it a little bit and soothes it a little bit, but like the ending on the second time watch more anticlimactic than it was on a first time watch because it basically goes nowhere. Like, Vivica A. Fox's character throws a dagger towards the hand and it hits Seth Green's character and it just disappears or evaporates. And then he makes a joke like, that's it, no explosion or anything. I'm glad everyone's okay, but like, that's it. That's how I felt on the second time I was watching it. I'm like, okay, I feel more like Seth Green's character in this moment. But the reason why I'm putting in the mixed is because, like, it fits the tone of this movie. You know what I'm saying? This movie doesn't take itself too seriously. It's a, laugh out loud, laugh riot. So, like, of course, it's gonna do that. So with that being said, let's move on to the thing that I don't like about this movie. And it's really easy to bring this up, but the special effects in here, not the practical effects. The practical effects look great, but the special effects in here, whether it be the horrendous CGI or the horrible green screen effects, those look hideous. I hate the way that looks. I know that some things, you had to do it, I guess, when using Eldon Henson's head and stuff like that, trying to CGI it or just move it somewhere else where they want it to be. They just don't want to use the head. And you can tell because there's like a certain, not grain structure, but like green screen effect to it where like you can tell that that's either a green screen effect or a CGI moment. And it makes me wonder what this movie would look like in 4K, because I have the Blu-ray from Scream Factory, and I'm hoping they make a 4K, but if not, it does make me wonder how those effects are going to look in 4K. But with that being said, I'm going to let you guys know this movie is not a great movie. It's like one of those movies that I classify last year's Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. It's not a great movie, it's a fun movie. And sometimes you don't sometimes you don't always need a great movie to watch. Sometimes you just want to sit down and have a fun time. That's what this movie is. So that's why I'm going to be giving 1999's Idle Hands an overall grade of a 78%. While I know that this movie is not everyone's cup of tea, and I wasn't sure that it was going to be the first time I watched it, I'm glad that I enjoyed it. Like I said, it's not a great movie, but it's a fun movie, and that's what I sort of come to expect when I saw reviews talking about this. I'm like, okay, so I know what to expect. And then when Chris Stuckman did his review, I'm like, okay, of course, I have to talk about it and watch it now. So, like, if it wasn't for his review, I probably would have watched this like a year or two down the road, and I would have just kept holding it off. So I'm glad I finally got to watch it, even though it's not great. It's just a fun time, but that's what you need sometimes, just a fun time. But with that being said, I just want to say thank you as always for watching my videos, and hope to see you in the next one.